Here we are. It is the dog days of summer, and like so many seasons before, we are already sick of talking about the Mets.
Yeah, how can it be dog days in mid-August? But it is for the Mets, right? Like it's
we're June, we're July right
the
now.
All-Star break just finished, and then the Mets came out and
They swiftly buried any hopes we had.
if you had any hopes there, those hopes are gone. So we've been talking about doing something during the All-Star break about not talking about sports, don't talking about baseball, talking about other sports. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to do.
We're talking about some of the other sports, just because we haven't talked about them, and there's been some interesting things going on in some other sports that I think would be very good for baseball to carry over potentially.
And it's just painful to talk about baseball. So I'm at the stage with baseball right now, and watching the Mets, by the way, that like they have. I think I said this on a prior podcast. They have to kind of earn my trust to make me want to watch pitch after pitch,
and to go into a team that was kind of like that for us for a long time, and that was our New York Knicks as a basketball team. They would need to earn our watching most seasons because there was a good chance by about mid-December they hadn't done that.
Yeah, it was years of, and not like, they won an NBA championship, but it's a legitimate franchise now, it feels like, for the first time in so long.
I'm excited for next season and expecting to make the playoffs. That's a huge improvement.
But I haven't, I'm close to, but not yet at the point where I'm starting to think about the other sports, like, training camps open for the NFL, and I pay a little attention to that, and the Jets are on Hard Knocks.
We're not going Mets, but we're not that far away from saying Jets.
Because maybe what happens, and I think this is probably going to happen. So I get so disgusted with the baseball watching the Mets that I'm not going to watch them as much, and I'll keep up with everything because I just do. I follow it.
Right. We're still following
interested in the other teams as well until the playoffs will come, and then it'll be a long enough time that I haven't cared about the Mets that I'll be able to watch the other games with like not feeling so bad about the fact that my team is watching with me.
Yeah. Especially when we didn't expect that this year.
Exactly. So training camps open. NFL. You're a good NFL fan, I think. You know a lot about football.
I'd say probably besides baseball, the other two I follow the most are football and basketball. I'm not that big into the NHL. I pay attention to it, but I'm significantly where I couldn't name like great players nearly to the same degree.
And I think for me, as I've been watching hockey since I was a kid, I'm old enough because I'm an old guy that the original NHL teams were around when I first became like aware that there was professional hockey. I was a little kid, but before expansion, and they added like the Canucks back in the late '60s and the Buffalo Sabres and stuff like that.
It was literally
just
the original
6 teams or 8 teams or something like that. So you knew all the teams, and so I knew a lot about hockey at the time because it was much easier to follow. Now there's so many teams and so many more players because you have so many more teams. It's not like you need to know 8 times 25, right? That's 200
players. You got to know
players.
like 25 times 25.
Exactly. So now you got 600 players. So
a lot harder.
And so I don't follow it nearly as closely. I watch my Islanders. I'm a big Islander fan or whatnot. But I'm not thinking about hockey yet. But I guess the training camps start in September. With the way the baseball season's going, I'll be thinking about that.
And I think it's interesting because you've got the 4 major sports here in America with baseball, basketball, football, and hockey. And it's been that way for a long time.
Right.
And nothing's really come in and nothing's really fallen out. Maybe within there, baseball used to be number 1 and now it's football or basketball, depending on who you talk to. Hockey might have been higher up at one point, but that's fallen decidedly into a pretty consistent 4th.
Yeah, of the so-called major sports. I think Major League Soccer has a pretty good chance to quickly, in not too long, take out NHL as probably the 4th most watched sport in the U.S.
We just aren't giving it its credit because we ourselves aren't big fans and aren't watching it.
I'm following it a lot more. I know Messi's playing down in Miami now, so I think that's really cool that he's playing here, and we've got Women's World Cup coming up, and the U.S. is going for 3 in a row. We're here to talk about other sports, man. There's a lot of other things going on besides baseball.
We just got finished watching the Wimbledon final.
Yeah, and Youth with Sir, that's a 20-year-old guy, goes out and beats the greatest of all time. Kind of have to call Djokovic, whether you like it or not. He's got the most majors.
And it was impressive watching Wimbledon because they were out there for like 4.5 hours.
Yeah, I said
5 hours.
I said that to you, going, what other sport do you get out there and sort of go that way for that long a period of time at sustained effort? Now, you get to sit down every other game for a minute and a half, but there was one game in this match that was 27 minutes long, and they just kept going after it.
No sport, the only sport that approaches the length of a full 5-set tennis match is probably golf. I don't think anybody out there is going to be saying a golf match is anywhere near as physically stressful as a tennis match.
Right. You run a marathon, obviously it's intense, but it's 2 hours and 8 minutes if it's really fast, So cricket matches take a really long time. I know that from like
baseball games can take a really long time, but you're not running like you are in tennis.
Right.
Tennis is probably the single most physically demanding.
Where you're doing it for
soccer would be the only other one, I think.
But the longest soccer game is going to be
just in terms of the sheer amount
2
of
hours
running that you do. Basketball, because I think it's like they look at how much they run over the course of a match. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I'm sure a guy that's playing
10 miles or something like that.
Is running a crazy amount of miles over the course of the match, running back and forth constantly.
And so baseball with its 162 games has the most, and so that paying wise, I thought, well, which of the sports, average salary, and you kind of looked it up, and I was surprised, right, because baseball was the
baseball has the shortest average career.
average career, which really surprised me.
Right, baseball and basketball are tied at 5 years. Then you have hockey at 6, and the NFL, interestingly, is the longest at 7. And we were kind of confused by that. But looking into it, so one of the things we realized is football teams have 53-man rosters. But there's a lot of guys that are on those rosters that are like on the special teams that are on those for years. And you have a lot of the guys that stick around. You don't have a lot of like 3-year guys in the NFL.
You know what got me about that? Because they used to say that running backs had the shortest career, right? The average running back was 3 or 4 years because of the punishment you take at the position. But that doesn't mean you can't have a guy who played, on special teams for 11 or 12 years because, and that sounds like a really dangerous way to make a living. And you just also
run into where if you're a football guy that can't hack it, you're just going to be gone within a year or two. You're not going to stick around like you can kind of in baseball. You're not going to have guys that have like 3 or 4 year careers where they kind of suck.
So the average salary for the NBA players is the highest. Wouldn't really, when you really think about it, that doesn't surprise you.
No, and I think it makes sense just because
it's like $9 million is the average.
Yeah, but also a single there's less of them.
Right.
And one single player makes probably a bigger difference in basketball than just about any other sport.
I think that's a fair argument. I was surprised that baseball is second.
But just the AAV of those contracts is insane.
And the problem is in baseball is you have so many top-heavy contracts that it really makes the $5 million average annual salary. It skews it so much because there's probably 30 guys that are making more than 50% of the money.
When Ohtani signs his contract next season, he's going to send up the average contract just as his own, probably.
Exactly. Ohtani's going to rewrite it. NFL is $2 million.
That makes sense because there's so many guys that are just getting
That's
paid.
the lowest. NHL is actually a little bit more than that. Which surprised me. So I always thought hockey players, because the stars in the NHL get paid, but the rank and file not so much.
No.
So I think the minimum salary is $750,000, and I was surprised that there'd be any minimum salary in one of these 4 sports we're talking about that would be less than $1 million.
But hockey being less than $1 million is not that big a surprise to me. It's the smallest audience. It's the smallest TV share. It is a passionate fan base, but it's just not demanding the same level. Like, you used to get hockey movies all the time. Like, think about through the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. There's a bunch of hockey.
I'm not sure if that's a barometer of popularity.
But you don't get those.
When's the last baseball movie you saw that was a good one? So,
well, that's not what I'm talking about.
So anyway, I think hockey, it does have a passionate fan base, but it's certainly not growing, beyond where
anywhere
it is.
Near. And it's a weather limited sport. It's a money limited sport. It's why you look at a sport like lacrosse. And you think, despite having a really passionate fan base and a ton of people playing it, it's just too prohibitive to get into, I think.
That's from a monetary standpoint, or
for getting people
training
into the game. Think about it. For basketball, for soccer, even for baseball can run into this issue, though it's not as pronounced as in lacrosse. In basketball and football and soccer and football also, technically, you only need a ball. That's really all you need to get started playing. Sure, football, you could use pads, but people are perfectly happy playing two-hand touch or just not playing with pads. But lacrosse, you got to go out and you got to get a stick. You got to get the pads. You got to get the ball. It's expensive. Those lacrosse sticks run up really quickly. So I think the ability to get new people into the game is a lot harder, because even if you are able to appeal to people watching you professionally, you're not going to be able to get kids converted into players nearly as easily.
And it's hard to penetrate the psyche of the sports fan in the U.S. to take lacrosse. People are much more aware of it than they used to be, obviously. But there's been a pro lacrosse league for years, and a nominal amount of people, follow that stuff that are passionate lacrosse fans. And it's just it seems almost impossible that it could be into a major spectator sport where people would show up to watch.
Yeah. Right, what it would take to all of a sudden elevate lacrosse into that same kind of conversation as the rest of the major sports, because even MLS doesn't get that kind of recognition.
But as East Coast people, I'll tell you this, as a baseball guy in a lacrosse town.
Oh, yeah.
You grew up in a lacrosse town. All I kept thinking watching the lacrosse game was, there's my center fielder, there's my shortstop. They were playing lacrosse. These were fantastic athletes that would have been really amazing baseball players had they chosen that, and they did. And that hurt the program.
Definitely
was something that...
Though I'm sure they probably looked at guys on the baseball team and they thought, there's my, attackman, there's my midfielder, and there's my defenseman, and they're playing baseball.
So, do you think a sport? We'll talk about a couple other sports that crossed my mind. So, when I was a kid, track and field was a bigger spectator sport because there was less to watch on TV in general, and obviously you'd follow it during the Olympics. Now
it's pretty much relegated to just a thing that we discuss during the Olympics, even though it's probably arguably the most participated in national high school sport.
Yeah, and the easiest to participate in, right?
Right.
Put on a pair of shoes and run.
Any high school can have a cross-country team. Not every high school can have a basketball, even a football team, let alone like a basketball team or a baseball team.
And even some of the more minor track and field games, the Pan Am games would be one. I remember following the Milrose indoor track and field games back in the day. They still hold those.
That sounds like a absolutely banger vintage T-shirt. Milrose Indoor Games Summer of 76.
This is a place in New York.
I'm just saying,
this place?
Like an awesome vintage T-shirt.
This is a little place, a little gym, I guess, and it has these banked wooden turns, and though these people run around like 80 million times because it's not very far in order to run like a mile. So some Irish guy named Eamon Coughlin won the Milrose Mile like a bunch of years, and he was one of the world's best. This was when you really followed it, because compared to the coverage the other sports got, you actually got coverage of the stuff,
and now, but people for whatever reason, I think,
doesn't pull.
It doesn't pull. Now, I think there's a few reasons for that. One, I don't think the best athletes do track and field anymore.
There's a lot of athletes out there.
But if you're a great athlete, are you doing track and field in the fall? Or are you playing football?
Well, so what you're talking about is from the professional aspect of.
But that's what I'm saying. Parents, because you now have parents. If I'm a parent and I see my kid is blessed athletically, I'm not encouraging him to get into track and field. I'm encouraging him to get into basketball. I'm encouraging him to get into football. I'm encouraging him to get into a sport where if he's actually really talented, he can get paid.
Right. So who's the number one men's sprinter in the world? I haven't the slightest idea.
Usain Bolt still?
No, he's retired. He's retired for 5 years.
We reveal our ignorance.
Exactly.
Or at least I do.
The point is, no, I don't know. I think I looked it up before. It's a guy. Somebody named Fred Kenley was a name that came up. I'm like, oh, okay.
It just sounds like a guy.
Exactly. It's a guy who's the fastest guy in the world.
It was Fred Kenley. Like it doesn't sound like the fastest man in the world. It just sounds like the guy next door to you.
And there's and because there's no professional payout, right? And you just think, if you wanted to do that, make it interesting, you'd have to put a lot of money in, and the problem is it'd have to come from Saudi Arabia. So
right.
that pretty much
and I
is
think
that.
Ultimately, like you look at something like that is gaining a lot of traction in the States with F1.
Yes,
that's getting very popular. And I think one of the things that F1 does really well is build its narratives. They're very good with all of the writers, the people storing it, the people calling the races. That you have people that are fans of drivers because they're fans of the team. You have people that are fans of the driver because they're fans of the driver. And you have people that are fans of the driver because he's from their country.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I was thinking F1, is one of those sports like golf and tennis where when the players compete, you see their country, right? You don't see Ronald Acuna get up and see, he's
they should.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
They should, because it gets people invested, and if
more invested
than they are. And anybody that's telling me no, they don't. It's like, if you're an American, tell me you're much more interested in the World Cup when America's playing in it. You're much more interested in any major tennis tournament when there's an American making a deep run. You want to root for your countrymen. It's a normal thing. So why shouldn't we celebrate? The only reason we haven't done it in sports like football and basketball and baseball is because up until now, it's just been all Americans for the most part. But now in basketball, you've got tons of European guys. In baseball, you've got tons of guys from all over the world.
That's what I'm saying. And NFL is probably the one sport you don't really need to do it.
Right. NFL, it's pretty much just all still Americans. There's like the odd guy that's from another country, and you don't need his symbol because the announcers will tell you that he's from a different country every time.
The Australian punter, right? Australian rules. There's always some Australian guy who punts.
But, other than that, you don't get guys. You look at in the G League right now for basketball, you have Kai Soto, who's a Philippines player. He's just in the G League. He's probably going to make the team, but it's not a guarantee. I think he's playing for the Thunder. And his G League games get more traction than like anybody else. Tons of engagement.
Wembanyama, right? If you put FR in for France and all that stuff, and you run it up there all NBA season, you're going to have a lot more French people watching the NBA.
Look at baseball and look at Shohei Ohtani. Japan paid more attention when they have Ohtani. They paid more attention when we had Ichiro. They paid attention when we had Hideki Matsui. People want to root for their countrymen. Why shouldn't we celebrate?
And we know why golf and tennis do it, because it's not a league. Mostly, it's not a league. It's just an open tournament. So you basically people are representing in some way the country. Except that I don't know that like in baseball, if a player gets up there, am I representing my country? Well, no, I'm trying to represent my team.
Right, but you just put the team flag, you put the team symbol, and then next to it you put the player's country flag. Because he's still from that country. He didn't stop being
absolutely
Ecuadorian when he became a Brave.
Well, he could be from Randy Arozarena, who actually played for Mexico, even though he's Venezuelan, because you
have the player pick what he wants to pick. Who knows? But that would be the kind of thing. And if they really want to make it, it would lead to some fun thing where some guy is shown in his major league career as X country for the entire time, and the World Baseball Classic rolls around, and now he's playing for Y country.
Yeah,
big deal. But I just think that if you want to get people into the game, you need to give them different reasons. If just the game was enough of itself, they would be fans already, except in the case that they literally can't watch the game. And we're seeing a basketball franchise and potentially a baseball franchise have to deal with that.
And the speed at which this information can be disseminated, A, and B, the
so
room
fast
on the screen, right? So we're so used to seeing busier and busier screens, and we could do a whole episode on how the game is being less focused on the stats, but that's a whole nother thing. But there's certainly room on, because I've come around to liking to see more on the screen than when I first started seeing all this stuff on there, like with the amount of pitches and what the pitch was.
But now it's nice, and you're like, I like it.
I'm looking for where's it? If it's not there, right now I'm like,
I want to know what he's hitting. I want to know what the count is. I want to know how many pitches the pitcher's throw.
I don't necessarily need to know. He throws sliders on third pitches in the fourth inning of every game, in December or something
or he's batting 286 with runners on second and a day ending.
It can get out of hand.
Why?
It can get out of hand. So stats, can definitely be. So what the major sport championships? I asked you before the game. So you know who's won the most baseball championships?
The Yankees.
Obviously, you imagine for NBA,
it's the Celtics.
That is indeed the Celtics. That's correct. How about for the NHL?
The Red Wings?
No, it's a good one. It is, in fact, the Montreal Canadiens. Right, and they had a whole bunch at a very contracted period to now. Looking back on it, was over like 20 years or something like that. They won a bunch of them. And in football, who's got the most Super Bowls?
Is it still the Cowboys?
It is not.
Then it would be the Patriots.
That is correct. Yes, and we Jet fans have to lament that because it's not. It's just bad enough,
but it's all happened in like the last 30 years too.
It's just, it's all the fault of Mo Lewis.
Yeah.
That's what I
had to take out Tom Brady.
Took out Drew Bledsoe,
and he gave us Tom Brady.
And the rest was history. Yes, It's all Mo Lewis's fault. Mo Lewis was a really good football player, by the way.
He brought on the scourge of Brady.
Yeah, and then he did.
We're finally free of him.
Finally, we think.
20 years later.
Okay, and how about soccer? When you think about soccer in I measure soccer in World Cups because I don't really know.
I think that would be the only way to measure it.
Well, yeah, I guess you'd.
I would guess either Italy or Spain.
It is Brazil.
Brazil.
They won them back in the 50s at the beginning of it. I think they're the only nation.
That should have been the guess, though. They're I know it wasn't England.
World Cups. So how about Hall of Fame? We talked about this before because in our sort of pitch to keep baseball and that they could put more people in. There's like 1.3% of the players ever in baseball that are in the Hall of Fame, and maybe 1.4%. NFL. Has 1.3%. That surprised me of its players in the Hall of Fame. I'm surprised that it's that low. I would have thought
it feels more exclusive. It feels less exclusive than that. But
right, 346 out of 26,000. That's impressive.
But football also has a lot more guys that
cycle through. Right. That's how they end up with having more football players than
a lower
baseball players have played in the history of baseball, which has been around a lot longer than football.
Basketball, I know, is very permissive.
It is, yeah. You're right. It's 4%.
They're much.
That's like a big difference.
That's a lot, especially because you have one of the lower overall player counts because you only have about 10 guys per team.
And the NHL 3.6%. So that also is high, which is interesting only because they play with fewer players than football.
I will say, you know what? I think it is interesting that when you have those two smaller team sports and they have much higher overall percentages, I wonder if it's because it's much easier to determine excellence from an individual player when there's only 5 or 6 of them on the court at a given time. It's much easier to see a great shooting guard compared to a great left fielder.
Right. And I think the impact, like you said before, of one player in that sport and wherever it is, if it's college or pro in basketball, is huge.
Huge.
And obviously, if you're a guy named Gretzky in hockey, that is also.
You've got to just rewrite everything.
So let's see. Last couple of thoughts.
Well, I think there was one thing I wanted to bring up. So one of the big things that has been a hullabaloo in baseball has been blackouts, and how it's very frustrating as a fan to sometimes have to spend like 5-10 minutes to sit down and watch a game and figure out where the damn thing is being broadcast. So
are you talking about Apple TV and Amazon Prime
and it's just, but it's also just unfun when you're trying to watch the game and it's just blacked out in your local area because.
Right, and if you try to use the MLB app in a market that has sold its rights to a local provider, like the market in which we live, you cannot watch MLB TV in that market. You have to buy it through the provider.
Exactly. So the Phoenix Suns, and we believe the Arizona, I know for sure the Suns, but I believe the Diamondbacks are also caught up in this. They had a whole fiasco with Diamond Sports.
Right.
And
not getting paid was a big part of it.
Was not getting part of it. So Matashita, the owner of the Suns, has elected to broadcast all Suns games for free on a streaming service next year. I believe it's through something called the Quick app. It's also going to be broadcast on television. And you will not need to pay any kind of third-party extra money in order to get access to Suns games. And they're going to sell ads, but you're going to be able to watch the Suns free of charge. And that's going to be one of the first professional sports teams to be doing this in a long time.
Right, and a long time is important, right? Because that's the way we grew up with sports.
Right? So it's just going to be interesting.
Before cable TV.
So it's going to be very interesting to see what the reaction is to this. Because I think baseball fans, on the one hand, understand the value the RSNs bring to each of the teams. And that it was almost impossible to ask them not to have them in the current market. But at the same time, we all know it really sucks having to pay for them and then occasionally paying for them and still not being able to watch the team.
Right, this is the problem, and three-inning fan Kelly's always complaining that she pays. We all pay a tremendous amount for cable subscription, and then you can't watch the game in your normal place. You have to bounce the ball, and figure out where they are televising this game.
You better have that service too.
You better have that service. So if you don't have Amazon, you can't watch the Apple has their game on Sunday morning at 11:30. If you don't have Apple TV, you're not watching the game, and that seems like for a fan that's spent hundreds of dollars a year on that sports channel to not being able to watch their team because they platformed it someplace else. There's something wrong with that.
Exactly. So it's going to be interesting to see what the knock-on effect this is, especially if it does affect the Diamondbacks as well, because if it's proven to be an effective model, Oh man, it'd be great to take that off the cable bill.
Right, and for the teams, they're losing a significant possible source of revenue. So that's the gamble here, is that the advertising revenue and whatever other revenue, instead of taking the $20 million, whatever it is, from the local regional sports network to broadcast right those games, they're not taking anything other than the individual game rights they might sell to the broadcast TV station that carries it. And that's there, but they're not charging fans. The point here is
the fans
they're
aren't
not
being
charging
charged
fans
at
for
the
that.
point of entry to watch the game.
So, and I'll be honest, in a smaller market like Phoenix, that's got a better chance of being successful than I think in a larger, market.
I think that's a good point.
It's not going to happen in the New York market or LA or Chicago, I don't think. So, and we're college fans here too, because obviously I'm a USC guy, and these are sort of back to the heydays at USC. So I definitely find myself watching a lot more sports in the fall months when they happen, because football starts.
Yeah,
and college football and pro
you've got
football.
You've got the basketball season on the way.
That doesn't really start until November, so you have the end of the baseball season,
the
transitions into the basketball
beginning
season,
of the basketball season,
and the hockey season starts like in August. It seems sometimes, but I think it's
sometimes it's like, they're playing hockey. I didn't know they were doing that.
It's like, man, wouldn't the ice? Anyway, so and then you throw in the U.S. Open in September and all that stuff. It is powerful in the fall when that kind of kicks off, and there's just not enough time to watch all the things we want to do.
It is nice though having good sports on every day of the week.
So and it'll be fun to watch baseball and games that mean something. But that probably isn't going to be until October.
But I think knowing us, we'll be back talking about baseball next week.
Can't get away from it.